a tarball? Is it the actual source code?
They make it with reference to a release.
Right. Okay, so a release on OpenStack.org of a particular tarball then, I guess.
Of a particular package with a particular version string.
Well, so the term package is dangerous. Okay, well, that's fine. Whatever.
Okay, a particular set of software identified by a release identifier.
Right, so it is the package as bundled by OpenStack and not as bundled by a downstream distro such as Ubuntu or Red Hat or Fedora or etc.
Yes, mostly. If somebody downstream takes the OpenStack release and puts it in a different format, then it is still considered to be the same release, and maybe it's designed to be, however packaged, the set of functionality identifiable relative to a certain release.
So there's an implicit assumption in there that packaging does not change the release, which I would dispute, but let's leave that be for now. As long as this is a reference to the OpenStack produced package, I think that makes sense.
That's basically how it works because they need to work across releases, and so let's give one example which I think may be clarifying. Let's say that a Linux distributor took the OpenStack package and then they bundled in an additional set of functionality. They bundled in maybe there's a new virtualization driver that they bundle in. Then what would be covered under OIN would be the functionality associated with the release from OpenStack.org and would explicitly exclude the vendor added functionality, unless that was separate.
Gotcha. So from a RefStack and DefCore standpoint, what is the optimum way for us to interact with OIN?
So what they want is, and the reason why OIN is important is because it is defining a set of cross-licensed functionality, that if someone has a patent that reads on something in one of those packages, some functionality in one of those packages as of the identified version, then that is cross-licensed within that OIN community. Mm-hmm. So what we want, and we're also working on a broader set of patent defenses, both for within OpenStack and for externally facing. So we need to decide, hey, well, let's take, for example, let's say that there's going to be, we want to make sure that there's no difference between what is covered by the trademark and what is covered by the patent cross-license. Because if you open up space between those, then that is going to, then that leaves room for lots of monkey business. Imagine for a second that we have in the future a program, which is one of the things that we're working on, that says, hey, we're going to, anyone makes an assertion against an OpenStack implementation, we are going to allow and empower the foundation to fight back on that and to participate in a legal defense fund around that. In which case, people are going to say, well, what is included in that sort of program? For example, would Savannah be included? Or if someone did patent infringement and accused Savannah, would that be included or not? And the idea is that whatever we ultimately end up defining as core, i.e. whatever is defined as being covered by the OpenStack mark is going to end up also being the same set of functionalities that we build patent protections around.
Okay, so
This actually is not as clear to me, because the purpose that we're defining with DefCore is the minimum set that's required if you want to claim the trademark. I think there's clearly things that are beyond that, and we want to be beyond it. Right? We had discussed previously the concept of commons.
Mm-hmm.
And I would expect things that are officially in commons would be included in this, in a trademark, potentially in a trademark.
The other potential challenge is that there is no logical association between OpenStack and Linux, in the sense that OpenStack can be run on a Windows machine using Hyper-V and hosting Windows VMs. So I don't object to including it in the Linux system definition, but I think we are stretching the Linux system definition, specifically when we're doing things like including the Hyper-V driver in it. So I would wonder if there are negative impacts on Linux as covered by the OIN.
Well, just one question here is from a DefCore point of view. So let's just remember that OIN did this on their own. I completely agree that they're taking the Linux definition and and extending it in a way which I don't think people anticipated, but that is what it is. I'm not sure, so I think getting the coverage from OIN is very helpful. I'm not sure how big an issue it is for DefCore, because I think DefCore is focused on what do we think the trademark should be used on. So the fact that we have a patent cross-license and that patent cross-license covers things that may not be within the scope of the trademark, I don't think is critical. We can, because from our point of view, what we control and what I think is critical to DefCore is what is it that is necessary to be used for somebody to say that they have an OpenStack distro.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, Van, do you agree with that?
Generally, yes. I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't, in particular, since OIN is a third party who has demonstrated a certain independence, I think is the kind way of putting it. They didn't actually come to us prior to doing this. I would be loath to give them more power, right? So.
Yeah, I would suggest, and Nick has just put this in the Etherpad, which I think is a great suggestion, that if OIN is asking for our input at this point, we would suggest that they should include everything that is declared integrated by the TC and not attach it to what's declared as core by DefCore, because that will give them the broadest coverage without undue influence on how we manage the trademark, use the mark.
Okay, we can certainly make that. We can certainly make that choice, and I wouldn't be surprised if, in some ways, I think that would be an easy and good way to do it. The one thought is that it may that does open up a this whole idea of coordination with OIN is to help put some sort of bounds around them, as opposed to, and have them act more in accordance with our wishes, because otherwise they'll sort of do whatever they want, as they have.
Right, but the advantage for us is to have them put as much as possible into the Linux system definition. Right?
I think maybe there's a question of, is there any disadvantage for a broad inclusion?
I would agree with Van on this. I think, what we're getting is basically, a defense to patent infringement, kind of free from OIN. I think we should try to make that extend as far as possible, and I think it should be completely independent from what DefCore thinks is, I hate to use the term, core, but let's use the term trademark core or something like that. The part of it that we care, the part that we're going to, allow, the trademark to be used on.
So, in thinking through it, I think that the negative impacts for having the OIN definition be very broad are very, very small to us. One that, in trying to game this out and play this out later, is we know that there are certain companies that are already in our community that are not going to join OIN. And one of the reasons why is because of the breadth of what is covered. And the idea is that we would have a smaller definition and cross-license focusing just on OpenStack that we would try and get those companies into. Now, if we, as a policy decision, wanted to say that's anything in integrated, I'm okay there, but I think that we may, in the future, want to make sure that there's parity between any specialized cross-license, any specialized cross-license that's OpenStack only, and whatever's in OIN. And just being aware that the broader we make it, the more pushback we will get from large patent holders.
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, I think we should just assume that dealing with OIN is a special case, and then it's decoupled from anything we may do internally, with our own members.
I think that we can't do that. I just wanted to highlight the possible issue.
Yeah, right.
From a DefCore standpoint, I think we're best positioned to say we are happy to let you know what's in the definition of core when we finalize it. We will also keep you apprised of what ends up being in OpenStack Common or whatever else as those terms come up. And you can talk to the TC about what's in the integrated release. But I think the rest of this should be left to the Legal Affairs Committee for now.
I'll echo that, but phrase it slightly differently. I think that our job is to make does not intersect with what OIN's job is, and I don't think that our decision process should be influenced by OIN's needs.
I agree with that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think this is really interesting. I actually think that our program versus project discussion might be more helpful for OIN as when we get into that than anything else.
Yeah. Also, I just, as a side note, it is worth considering to think about Microsoft. And if Microsoft becomes a member of OpenStack at some point, they clearly are unlikely to agree not to pursue patents against the Linux system. And as the Linux system definition starts to include Microsoft code, that's confusing.
Well, I mean, there are already certain instances of that, because I know that Canonical and Microsoft have been collaborating on the Microsoft PV drivers, so that Canonical's got those better support under KVM for Windows instances. It does seem like there are places where Microsoft's playing nice. It's not as a whole, but,
No, it's more the issue of they are unlikely to join OIN.
No, they won't.
And the foundation itself is now a member of OIN. And so, I don't know if there are commutative properties there, but there is definitely something confusing in that, and I think we should leave it out of DefCore since most of us aren't lawyers.
I believe some people are part of OIN and they cherry pick what they provide. So like IBM's a member, right? IBM doesn't put all of its patents into OIN. It's a case by case.
Yes, but it's still the reverse case is the entirety of this Linux system.
The cherry picking, by the way, doesn't occur. The limitation is by the functionality of the packages of what is included. And then there's a temporal restriction that some people can hook into. Oracle's adopted the temporal restriction. HP has. Facebook has. One or two others.
Right.
Yeah, I think Van's correct. I mean, I think it's your entire patent portfolio unless you opt out, which people can do, for particular projects or on all future projects.
So I basically I'd suggest that we summarize the OIN portion in 3 ways. Number one, a couple people have made the point that we should be doing this for our needs and not OINs. I would suggest that we adopt that as a consensus point. I definitely agree there. But I would say number 2 is our interaction with OIN is in terms of, okay, how can we guide them to do things that we would like, and there's probably an inclination, at least in the OIN sense, to push the coverage there as broadly as possible. Number 3 is just we should be aware that the things that we're doing in terms of defining core eventually will probably have some impact in the future on some aspect of patent protection.
Right. Well, again, I think that is more for the Legal Affairs Committee to come to DefCore and say this is what we think are the impacts that you'd be aware of, rather than the reverse. It's not for us to think of the legal impacts because we're not qualified. It would be for the Legal Affairs Committee to come to us and say, we believe these are the impacts. These are our recommendations.
Specifically the charter.
Yeah.
I think that would be fine.
Okay. Should we move on to Tempest? Can I invite Andrew from IBM to share any insight he has into the state of Tempest coverage, if any?
I think Catherine's also on as well. I think the set we were looking at, one of the things we were trying to figure out was whether, I think it was about 650 total tests in the base we're looking at, of which, roughly half are sort of, I guess you could call them negative or error case tests.
Yeah.
And we whittle it down, we get somewhere around 300 API level tests that go across the core of the OpenStack, what's likely to end up being the core bits like Nova and things like that we focus on. Of those, I think we saw about 100 unique behaviors. So there's a few things I think would be interesting to get a group view on here. As we drill it, we can certainly drill down more on a function-by-function basis and say, is this reasonably well covered? Or we could just take that set and take I think what Joshua and Rob were suggesting a few weeks back and do a community voting style on them. But there's a couple of things I think are worth maybe discussing quickly as a group. One is, do we want to push for the likely to succeed on the things that can succeed interop, where we don't focus so much on implementations that error out consistently. We focus on the cores and the productive behaviors. Or do we want to have a separate test suite that focuses on, hardening and edge cases and makes sure that, a tool set that has erroneously long machine names or tries to substitute, stuff that would fail an assertion test like strings where numbers should be and stuff are important as well. So before we go kind of drilling down, I didn't know if we had any thoughts on what kind of coverage we ultimately want to end up with. Is it just stuff that says behaviorally this thing will produce the right result, or do we want to also focus on the hardening of implementations as well and bring in what are called the kind of negative tests?
The criteria subcommittee at last meeting did agree, and I'm just pulling it forward. I believe it was Alan's recommendation that, where are we here? Yeah, I've got it open as well. I'm just, that quality, clarity, and completeness should also be criteria for core and testability. And so I think there is a bias at the moment that part of our criteria should be that core capabilities can be tested for quality, which would include all of the negative testing, fuzzy testing, etc. But as far as what we surface directly in the RefStack scorecard, I don't have a strong opinion either way. I can see really good arguments on both sides.
Yeah, the reason I brought this up is that I had a bit of history from the, maybe we shouldn't speak about web service days, but it actually required quite a bit of development investment by some companies to get failure cases to report consistently in such a way if you were doing, full comparisons. And it's, in terms of how the systems would respond, on REST calls and stuff like that. So I was leaning more towards the, make sure all the things that end users should be trying in terms of focus, right? And I think the goal is continually expand upward in terms of number, variety, of tests and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know if we wanted to give any. So I understand the comment from the last DefCore meeting, but just in terms of, getting people to absolutely agree on something that they'll be sensitive about with respect to product branding or product trademarking. Mm-hmm. It was better to agreement. I'm trying to balance the two thoughts that were in, or the two or three schools of thought coming from the previous meetings here. Because I noticed on the one hand it talks about lease set, and the other hand it talks about quality and completeness.
So Andrew, you're reminding me of what the major topic is for our next meeting, or one of our topics, which is about weighting. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that became obvious to us is that the criteria really aren't well suited to be absolutes necessarily, but really a weighted set. And one of the ways that we handle this type of question that way is positive tests higher than negative tests. But I think that I can imagine negative tests that we definitely want in, because they are things that have to fail in a predictable way, and that's good. Yeah. And so I don't want a class exclusion, but I think that it should.
Well, I also think we need to think about be careful about the context of what we said, the least possible set. We're talking about the smallest set of capabilities, not the smallest set of tests. We need the largest set of tests that validate the most comprehensively the smallest set of capabilities. Good point. So I'd love to think about one API endpoint having 1,000 tests to prove that it functions appropriately. Right?
Yes. Right. So we're testing a small set of capabilities. We're trying to keep the capabilities list short, the test list high. And so from that perspective, we almost want to look at the test coverage as if the capabilities is a core capability because it has 5 tests on it. If we have 10 negative tests that also cover it, we'd want to include them. Mm-hmm. So I think, does that address your question, Andrew?
Yeah, you mean in the sense that maybe the way forward is to grab what we think are, I don't know, the best 100 and then weight all the rest lower to start or something like that?
Well, the weights I think will help us figure out which negative tests are pass or ones that we should consider.
Right.
But I think that Josh drove us in the right direction, which is these are capabilities, and if we're testing capability, include the negative test. That's great. Don't bring in a negative test that exposes a new capability just because it's a highly weighted negative test. So I think that the thing that surfaces here is actually a decision that I want to make as a committee, is that we're gonna try and group tests by capability, by the capability being tested, and that will actually there'll be a clustering algorithm that we need to apply to this. So
totally agree.
Okay. Can we just make sure we close this issue, because I actually think that that's a reasonable thing to document as a target.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Catherine, I think there was some other question we had, and I don't know if we wanted to bring one of the Tempest,
Yeah.
you know,
And another question is...
smoke and gate, and whether those should have had any kind of weighting already put into them in terms of the classifications that are currently in use by the Tempest group.
Yeah, so I'm less concerned. In other words, I think the explicit statement by DefCore is that we trust the TC and the project members of each of the OpenStack projects to continue to add tests until they are happy with the, and we will always work off of the tests that are available. We don't have a mandate to go and write new Tempest tests. My concern, and the reason I put this on the agenda for today, is that we do have a mandate to not include things in core if they don't have test coverage. And I can't seem to figure out what our state of test coverage is. And so I was hoping you might be able to give me some insight, or maybe Ann Gentle has some insight, or someone, in what percentage of our APIs do we actually have good Tempest coverage for right now?
Have we tried to calculate that, Catherine, as far as?
I only see, we haven't calculated ourselves, but I do see that for the most coverage we have is for Nova, and the percentage is about 80%. And from the talk, it seems like 10% is not testable, but the coverage right now is 80%. So in Tempest right now, there is two major test category right now. One is the API test, which is what we talked so far, the gate, the negative gate, the smoke test, etc. There's another major set that come out this time with Havana, which is scenario test. So scenario is a test across different components. So will that be in DefCore as well?
It will be, as long as we can map it to a specific capability. In other words, let's take, and these originally, the original scenario tests were the smoke tests that we had at NASA, and we did things like, hey, define a volume, attach it to an instance, write data to it, detach it, attach it to a different instance, read the data, detach it, and delete it. That was a really common scenario. That tests both Cinder and Nova APIs. So we have one test that actually expresses multiple capabilities, but that's fine. We might say, we believe this scenario is part of core, and therefore this test is a must-have for core, which is why core is not this project is in or out, but this capability is in or out, and a capability could be easily expressed by a scenario, even if it spans projects and programs.
Aren't those usually a compound of a previous smaller test, like, can I create a volume? Can I attach a volume?
It would be nice if they're always put together that way.
I don't know the reality of how Tempest works today. I'm just that's the way
So
it is.
those what you just described is right now in scenario test. In the API test is per task. So you just say create a volume. If you pass, that's pass. The connection of the API test typically is not a prerequisite of previous action. The scenario test is, and that seems like it is. We didn't see that kind of grouping in the past in Grizzly. We saw that in Havana, Tempest.
Yeah. Well,
seems like what we need to define is the capability. Then, once we define the capability, then we can go and map out what is existing test case in Tempest. Right now we do it reverse. We're trying to look at what is in Tempest.
Yes, we're going to continue to do it in reverse. We're going to continue to look at what's in Tempest and roll those tests into capabilities, because we have no way to do it the other way around.
But
yeah, and that's what we try. That's what we are doing right now. We create a spreadsheet and we try to map out, and we haven't gone further by mapping the capability, but right now we just have an inventory what is being tested.
Where is this spreadsheet?
We, right now is a spreadsheet in our.
Where would you
desk
like it to
right
be
now.
is probably the better question.
Yeah,
How
we
about Google
should.
Docs?
Okay. So you want, there's a well-known spot where you throw stuff in Google Docs for this project?
Not
That's
really.
the link.
It's just whatever. If somebody uploads it, then we can mark it read by link, probably the sharing setting.
And you can just attach it right into Etherpad.
Scenario test.
I mean, that would be, that, using that spreadsheet as part of the criteria would be really useful for us. So as we're wading through some of these things and we're looking at, let's say, Neutron as an example, we can look at the spreadsheet and say, oh, well, we have no tests for these sets of capabilities. Therefore, A, those capabilities can't be part of core, and B, it puts some concern on the other capabilities that we maybe do have tests for because they're not comprehensive enough.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, so there's probably a few things we'll want to add, Catherine. One is like an extension or not, and I don't know if we want to do a rough grouping to the way. Have we thought about how we name capabilities? Do we want to name them according to the way we roll them up in the API docs or something, or?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
That is a very good question. I think the original goal for RefStack before we defined DefCore was to be able to use the links from the scorecards to the API docs for that version, so the naming would have to map exactly. And I think that's probably still the easiest way to do it, because if it's not in the docs, it doesn't exist.
Are these
That's
scenarios?
what it is.
Makes sense. This is Ann, by the way.
Hi, Ann.
But yeah, I'm just not sure. I'm just trying to map like scenarios to like our existing docs, and I'd have to think about it. I'd have to look at that.
I'm not sure that it would be
to get a good
scenarios,
mapping.
and
Yeah.
I think it would be the capabilities under the scenarios. So a scenario
Okay.
would be decomposed.
I mean, is it a scenario boot from volume?
I think boot from volume is a capability. I think a scenario would
Okay.
be volumes attaching to instances, because attach, detach, read, and write. The problem is the API call to create a volume can return correctly, and yet the volume was never created. And in fact, create and attach sequence can return correctly, but not do anything. The only way to validate is
We do something as simplistic as saying a capability is expressed through a single API call, success or failure.
All right, that's the only mapping we would have now to docs. We don't have a higher easily mapped.
yes, although there may be a set of tests that are required to validate that capability.
Okay.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. There might be more than one way that you test it or do a negative test on it.
Boot instance is a single API call, but you need 50 tests to test it correctly.
So the API capabilities defined.
I was just wondering if we could map capability directly to a single API call, because then it makes it very easy to kind of express that. And then a scenario is something that takes multiple API calls, possibly across multiple programs or projects.
I have an idea that is probably a stupid idea, so please, everyone, feel free to say so.
There's a reason this doesn't work. Sorry, go ahead.
So one of the things that I was thinking about is we're talking about positive capabilities, things that should happen. What about flipping it around and saying, if this is designed to describe a common set of functionality, is there something to be gained by focusing on a test as something that would be a compatibility barrier between different implementations or instances of installed instances of OpenStack?
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a relevant perspective, but I think we will get ourselves into trouble if we start trying to second guess which things will be a barrier and which won't. I mean, I think we should assume that if we're considering it and it passes the criteria, then it is potentially an interop issue. So the only problem, just to go back to what Randy was suggesting, the problem with mapping to single API calls is there are other things like the Python clients and the dashboards that don't have APIs that we still need to be able to test and validate if they're going to be part of core. I mean, I would love to take Unified Client as an example. Is Unified Client ever going to be core or not? Was it an abortive effort? What about the new Unified Client by Termi, which actually works?
You know, I know that we've got people who are starting to gear up and spend developer cycles on the Unified Client, so I think it would be good.
Yeah, exactly. So I think in cases where there is an API, I think a capability can be mapped to the single API. I think if we say interface instead of API, and then we mean API if it has that as an interface, and we mean the CLI if it has that as an interface.
So a single interface call? I mean, API includes the word interface.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something ending with I.
Yes, something ending with I. Validating common workloads, if they're written up as scenario tests, that's a totally legitimate scenario test that could be accepted or not. But I think, again, it's out of scope for us to write new tests.
It is out of scope. I think that's something we should actually document.
Mm-hmm. It is totally legitimate for us to say this cannot be core because there are no tests. It is not our job to rate the tests.
I believe there are some Tempest tests which are now workloads.
Nice. Yeah, the scenario
It may
tests.
not be our job to write.
Use them where they exist.
You said I agree that it's not the job here to write the tests. It's our job to define that something is core or not. But I don't think it's out of the realm of what this group is supposed to decide to say if something is something not testable, is something not verifiable, then maybe it doesn't belong as part of core, whatever core ends up being.
Yeah, I mean that's criteria that we've already got in the criteria subcommittee. That if it's not testable, it is probably not going to be in core.
So, from this perspective, so we're not going to write tests, but we are going to identify gaps. I think it's very reasonable for us to have, as an output, a gaps list.
Yeah.
That I would think that, actually, this might be very actionable, that we should identify both, here's the tests that are core, and here is, for the community, here's a list of places we think there's gaps. So I would actually elevate that to a committee deliverable for the release, for the
I agree. I think the right way to do that is to take the spreadsheet that Catherine and Andrew have and work with Ann Gentle to look at, are there other things that are in the docs that are not in the spreadsheet, and then are there things in the spreadsheet for which there are no tests? That should give us that gap. I just wish that was somebody else's job. That's a lot of work.
So I think this is going to fall out naturally.
Okay.
And from my perspective, this is it's a pressure relief valve.
Okay.
So,
Right.
Because I think what it's going to let us do is say, look, yes, we know that your favorite project is not included in core, and one of the reasons is that there wasn't sufficient testing, and by providing a list, we actually have a mechanism to
Give people something to go
a
do.
way to go rage, or not rage, actually.
Yeah.
I hate to be that specific, but...
And then we do have this open question of whether tests that represent quality will or will not be used as criteria, but I think we can defer that. In other words, how long is it okay for an instance to take to boot, for instance?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a slope.
Yes, I love that slope. But it's what derailed the FITS process the first time, so I won't bring it up too strongly.
What are we?
The quality tests.
Right.
Yeah, use of quality tests is a dangerous slope. Yeah.
So Joshua, I thought you were going to head a different direction and ask the question on how good is the test itself? How well does it perform the test? Do we have to gauge that?
Well, that was the one I'm saying we're dodging around because we know that we have non-deterministic failures in gate right now. I am going to leave my trust in the QA team to resolve and improve that over time. And continue to say.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your question on GAP, do we, Catherine kind of made it sound like maybe a list exists. So there is no list of gaps, test gaps?
I haven't go that far yet. So far we mostly work on the inventory. I haven't really looked at the gaps.
Okay.
I'll have David Lenwell and the RevStack team talk to the QA team. The QA team may also have a list.
But remember, guys, we're talking about Havana right now, and we're always going to be lagging. So the only thing we can do is come back and say, this API a lot of people want, but there's not enough coverage for it, therefore it's not core. I actually think that's the right stick and carrot, frankly. That people who believe this is, exactly the thing. If somebody believes that this is a core capability, literally, those words, then they should be writing the tests that help allow us to include it in the definition.
That's pretty reasonable, and it's not as much work to build those tests as it is to write code and get it pushed upstream. So, I mean,
hopefully.
It's a lot less work to write the test than to get the code written and accepted.
Oh, and accepted, yeah, totally.
So,
that's true.
Well, I definitely think it's the right place to start, where we are right now.
Okay, so that encourages a cultural.
We did have issues previously with the process to expand test coverage on older releases. So again, we need to make sure that our focus is always on encouraging people to add tests in the current cycle for the current code, because there actually isn't a process to backport things into stable very well.
Not for tests.
Not for tests, not for anything in general. Yeah. Cool.
See what the catch one questions. Quality and performance tests. That's I'll punt that to the criteria committee. So.
What would you all think about a statement from this committee that says, we believe that there is a place for quality tests, as at this point we do not have any defined?
We don't define the tests. I mean, I think the criteria committee will end up saying these are the slate of tests that we believe, these are the criteria we believe should be applied. We'll go through and say these are the tests that we believe should be used as must-have. If some of those are quality tests, that will end up being the statement of this committee. But I don't want to predetermine that. I think we need to go through and look at the tests and see what we have. Because it may be that there aren't any decent quality tests and the point's moot. But if there are some, I think the committee needs to be free to consider whether those could be used as must-have. We could use them to set a precedent that we believe quality is part of core, but the bar could be so low that every project passes. Like an instance must launch within 12 hours of the notebook.
I guess part of what I'm thinking is because we're approaching this from. This is it's it really has, I guess I see this as trademark and interop. But when you approach this from a trademark perspective and you have that frame on, this is about what do we want to establish as, what does the brand OpenStack mean in various senses?
Yes.
And I think that it would be a useful statement to say that we are, we think that we think that saying there's a certain quality of implementation that is required to be OpenStack or OpenStack compatible or whatever the marks are, because we want people to be able to say with a certain degree of assurance, oh, that such and such public cloud is built on OpenStack. They're branded OpenStack. I know that I can count on a certain level of quality associated with that. I don't think that
I agree personally, but I also know that that debate is what derailed the FITS process the first time we tried to do DefCore 2 years ago. So I'm very cautious about introducing it again without a little bit of further thought. I think we should put it into the criteria subcommittee and come back at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
right. I'm not necessarily saying what the quality test should be or what bar they should be at least initially. I think that it's...
I'm sorry to cut you off. To keep the agenda, this is really a criteria subcommittee discussion, and we need to move it to that.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll shut up.
All right. I'm happy to take it up there. I'm not disputing whether it's value. It's just timing.
Yeah. What do we got next?
We have
program versus project.
We have a question that I just wanted to tie off. Once we define which tests are core, it's an ongoing process. So this committee is set up as a standing committee, and we will go once the criteria are done. It should be easier, but we're gonna have to do this every cycle on a standing basis, and then we also have new items that we are intentionally not doing in this cycle, and those will also come up for the committee. So.
I would also just say as a committee process, I think we should, once a cycle, we should open up committee membership again, both to the TC and the board, and let folks swap in and out as they burn out. No offense, but there is some expectation that people will get tired.
You're not putting it on up time.
That's right. Oh. People will get tired of talking to us.
Okay. Yeah. Hand the torch. All right. I think that we've got actions out of this. I think we've got a couple of resolutions which are good. This is going to be an ongoing topic, so what I'm suggesting is that we revisit this in the next agenda.
I agree.
And so,
and actually, Catherine and/or Andrew, when you have that Google Doc link, if you can paste it into this Etherpad, that'll be the easiest place for everyone to circle back and find it.
And I'm starting to build the agenda for the next meeting, so let me do that. So if you want to kick off the next topic, so let's close this topic unless there's any objections. Okay, I'll set it up in the agenda for the next one. Okay. Do you want to stage this next topic?
Project versus program. If I can remember what the thesis was precisely enough to...
I can give it to you if you need.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
All right, so come back to this page. So I learned something when we started doing the startup, the kickoff for this that helped eliminate it, and then consequently watched us really mangle this in the community, which was the difference between programs and projects and the application of the OpenStack trademarks. And so there's a couple of things that are very easy. The words OpenStack compute, OpenStack networking are programs. There is no dispute about that, and those clearly have the trademark OpenStack TM networking, OpenStack TM compute, and it is completely clear that you can use the trademark to describe the programs in that sense. And there's a set of programs that have been defined. I suspect probably need to be board ratified because I don't remember voting on them, but that seems very clear. It's also very clear that we have a set of projects in OpenStack that are very clearly defined boundaries with TCs and things like that, like Nova, Neutron, Cinder, Swift, right? That's also very
source code repo.
That's aligned with the source code repo. There's been a considerable amount of attempt to link the project to the program and thereby get the trademark. So you could say, for example, OpenStack Swift or OpenStack Neutron, to the point where we actually are trying to say there's a one-to-one correlation between programs and projects. So the thing that sort of made the light bulb go off is we have to discuss it to me was the TC asked to officially be able to call telemeter OpenStack
metering,
telemetry, OpenStack telemetry. So what the way they said it is the project telemeter is now known as OpenStack telemetry trademark.
Notice.
And at which point I raised the flag of, hold on a second, my understanding of the program definition is that you would say project telemeter is a member of the OpenStack telemetry program, not that it is it. And just like, so we have a couple of programs that might only have one member. So OpenStack Compute is comprised of the Nova project.
I thought it also had Glance.
In the Glance I believe you're right, in the Glance project. So the directionality of membership is significant. And so I think it's worth us resolving as a committee that we believe this. And then I think we need to go direct the board and thus the foundation to start addressing this as a trademark cleanup issue.
Yeah. I would also suggest that... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Isn't there a problem where there is a representation of what is a program, a project, in terms of defining core members of a project, etc., but there is no representation of anybody embodying a program?
Correct. Projects have teams. Programs do not have teams. They have projects. Correct. There is also a process for applying as a new program. And there is a process that projects can apply for to become integrated. My feeling is there is a ridiculous proliferation of programs, and a lot of them could be consolidated usefully. For the sake of use, if the program really represents time and a track at the summit and the use of the mark in a particular way, we don't need one-to-one correspondence of program to project, which we nearly have right now. And the original,
you can take OpenStack, you could put Cinder and Swift into OpenStack storage.
Yes.
And
it also gives us a logical home for Manila, so that Manila doesn't have yet another program unless it dies. Yeah, I mean there are a bunch of things that could be logically rolled out.
I guess.
Well,
if I start to think about it, I see programs as being things where we don't want them to be inherently competitive, but I wouldn't mind seeing projects be competitive within a program so that a project, when you've got, somebody could build another project that might be competitive with another one within the program, but then the one that wins over time sort of floats to the surface. Like that seems useful to me.
So this is Mark Radcliffe. I think we also need to think about the framework here. There are two different issues you need to think about. Number one is, are those programs sufficiently well-defined so that when we use the OpenStack brand with another word like compute, we're talking about something that's of consistent quality. That's fundamental to trademark. So the other issue, and this is a separate one, is to date, the protection has been focused on the OpenStack brand and certain, variations on that, generally I think involving logos and stuff. that means that somebody else could have a registration for compute, and they could object to the use of OpenStack compute. And this is a problem that happens, we've already obviously had it once, I think, within the OpenStack Foundation, but it also happens in other foundations where people adopt stuff informally, it isn't cleared, they fall in love with it, and then they discover somebody else has it. So to the extent that you are, authorizing the use of things like OpenStack compute, you need to think through the consequences of that and the risk that somebody may have the brand, maybe it's not compute, but maybe it's, OpenStack XXX, whatever, we choose in the future, that if we don't go through a formal clearance process and we don't protect it, we could find people getting demand letters and all sorts of other things. So that is one of the consequences of, adding stuff on. And I guess the third component I would say is I think there has to be a very clear educational campaign, if we go down this path, about the fact that there's a limited number of things that can be used attached to OpenStack. Because my concern is, as OpenStack becomes more ubiquitous and people see OpenStack X and OpenStack Y and OpenStack Z, they're going to, just like the problem we had with IBM, they're going to think, well, I can put OpenStack AA because, that's okay. But, that's just an educational thing.
Well, and I actually feel like your points argue in favor of having programs clearly delineated and smaller in number,
yeah.
right? And the whole idea that we're OpenStack metering, now we're OpenStack telemetry, to me is a flag of we're OpenStack, I don't know. And what that program actually is not ready for, we're not ready to define it. Right, Mark, I would actually, I think that we want to be able to go through the foundation and say we are thinking of using OpenStack XaaS as a program, clear it, make sure it's good, right? There's no surprise programs popping up. Here's the one or two or three projects that we think are candidates as members. Clear it, and they can very clearly say, I have OpenStack foo, trademark, project, bar.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a formal process, and clearance is not, necessarily cheap. If you really want to do the clearance right, you're going to do it internationally, which means that, it's going to be, you're going to be layering on some expense. So as you think about the value of having OpenStack foo, and the cost, you need to think about the cost of clearing foo and protecting foo. And, that's just the nature. I mean, now there is, I think, an alternative where instead of doing OpenStack foo, you do the foo program, the foo component of OpenStack software or something like that. And maybe that's too much of a mouthful, and maybe we think we want to avoid that. But that's kind of, that's the alternative. So.
Foo component. So that would get us out of the trademark issue.
Yeah, I mean, you could still have people come after you and say, well, foo is actually my brand, you can't use the foo component. But at least you don't have it plugged onto OpenStack. I mean, anytime you name any of these components, you have, unless the name's totally generic, so if it's, this is the telemetry component, and what it does is telemetry, then that's not protected by by trademarks, or if you say this is, storage, storage is not a protectable brand for storage, that would be the other alternative, is to make them completely descriptive.
All of the programs are generic terms.
By definition.
By definition, they're OpenStack orchestration, OpenStack networking, OpenStack.
Well, but I don't think orchestration, for example, is generic. I think orchestration has sufficient other meanings that it would be protectable as a brand. Maybe just run it past us and make sure that it's generic.
I don't think that's true at all. I think orchestration is an extremely overloaded term. It's used for so many things, it's not even funny. I don't think it's protected in any way.
Yeah, it is.
No, I'm sorry.
Generic, at least among this, at least, I would say that's generic, at least in this trade. because of it's used in so many areas. It's a term of art, yes, where it can be used in different senses, but here it has a clearly defined commodity meaning. I agree that I don't think that orchestration alone can be protectable.
I actually remember when we started this, because of the trademark issue, those terms were specifically chosen because they were considered neutral and not trademark concerns. And that's part of what we're trying to do with this is we are trying to protect the projects from trademark issues by putting them under a clearly defensible trademark, right? So my understanding of doing this was that we would not have to worry about whether Nova was trademarkable, but it's OpenStack Compute is our trademark. The project is Nova, and so if you want it, and here's the purpose. If you want to say call it OpenStack, you have to use the trademark acceptable term OpenStack Compute, and then say Project Nova. And that keeps us out of the, oh, wait, you're Neutron, or sorry, I'm successfully over the hump. Your quantum, using the word Project Quantum infringes on the trademark. If we had always said OpenStack Networking Project Quantum, there would have been no confusion, that's my understanding. There would have been no confusion, and we therefore wouldn't have had to change the project name. By saying OpenStack Neutron or OpenStack Quantum, we're actually creating potential confusion with the company, and that becomes more problematic.
Well, I mean, just guys, just to give you an example, I'm on the PTO website, and there's Commerce Orchestration, which is a registered trademark for e-commerce software to facilitate e-commerce, and there's no disclaimer of orchestration. So whatever the facts are, the Patent and Trademark Office clearly considers orchestration as something that's potentially protectable. There's mobile care orchestration, which is a service mark. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we may need to drill down a little bit more when we say, well, this is really something that's not, that's not protectable. Because we have
one thing that you'll note there is that that's orchestration in association with a second term.
Yeah.
As opposed to,
but there's no disclaimer. Well, let's not get into the legal point. The point is the Patent and Trademark Office has not said that orchestration is generic for computer services. So as we go back, and I think we ought to go back and look at everything we're using and run it through the Patent and Trademark search base to make sure we haven't got something that somebody thinks is protectable or that the Patent and Trademark Office thinks is protectable. So,
All right. So the resolution I think still stands, which is that there is some confusion around programs and projects. The DefCore committee believes that it is appropriate to refer primarily to programs as the thing that can use OpenStack marks outside of the commercial mark policy that we are talking about as the purpose of DefCore, and that we would like to work with the board and the TC on limiting the proliferation of programs and resolving this confusion around there being a one-to-one mapping between projects and programs. In other words, to use programs the way they were intended, which is as a container for multiple projects and a team around them, as well as the things.
So does that solve the I thought the real problem the TC was asking to solve was the ability to use an OpenStack brand to sort of designate some official status to projects as well, right? I mean, even if you group.
Right, but what we've said is that the projects will never have an official status. Yeah.
Go ahead, Todd.
Even if you wrap those around one, there is some mechanism by which, like right now, you've got Heat and Ceilometer, for instance, that can't be called OpenStack anything, right? They're not officially tied to OpenStack because of the current limitations of the core definition. So we have to solve that problem as well, regardless of whether we have the programs and projects grouping discussion. Or am I wrong?
So here's the action that I'm suggesting out of this, because the reason this is on our radar is that the TC is asking for these projects to be named programs and then included in the list of core in the bylaws that the board actually controls. And so the actions I would suggest is that we should recommend to the board the list of program names to be added, to be used in the bylaws instead of project names, because that change we need to make. We are actually chartered to make it. Put it in as that, and then ask the TC to nominate projects to be included in a program. And then so what's happening is that we still have the relationship and the controls, but what would happen in this case is the board says OpenStack Compute, OpenStack Networking, OpenStack blah are considered core OpenStack projects according to the definition in the bylaws in that controversial paragraph, period. And then the TC can ask to have a project included in the program. So they would be coming to us and saying, board, we think it's appropriate for Project Kilometer to be included in the telemetry program. And we would vote on that, and everybody would be happy. Well, the people that can be.
There are some people like myself who will never be happy if Kilometer is ever voted on for anything, but I just don't like the name.
It's an integrated.
It's a perfectly good piece of software. It just needs a better name.
You just need a trademark that you can make it change its name.
Is there a relationship between programs and whether something is core or integrated? I mean,
integrated
in particular, I guess, is the area.
Integrated is a designation for projects based on the TC, and we've established the TC.
Core is for programs in.
Core is for capabilities, not programs or projects.
And this is what I'm hoping to do with my suggestion is to break this logjam where the things in the bylaws are programs and they don't change and they're very and Mark, I think this addresses your concern. We have a set of OpenStack capabilities that are clearly delineated at a trademarkable level, and then what we're really doing is controlling what things are included in those programs or not included in those programs.
And so just to play that out so that I understand what I think you're saying is a project would never be core. A project would belong to a core program.
Correct.
So you wouldn't you'd never be able to say Nova is core, but you would be able to say Nova is part of OpenStack Compute, which is a core program of OpenStack.
I would take the word core out of it because we're trying to define core as a capability test.
Yeah, so
I would say this is
but we have to have
that paragraph convolutes it. We're talking about
so
using trademarks.
let me rephrase that. So you would never be in a position where you could talk about OpenStack Nova, but you could talk about Nova as part of OpenStack Compute.
Yes.
Okay.
OpenStack Nova is problematic, is my understanding.
Right, and so the idea is to get a way of using OpenStack from any projects, but then the way that projects get associated with an OpenStack brand is they become officially approved as part of an OpenStack branded program. I'm just saying this out loud because it helps me understand it, but I think that's what you're saying.
I want somebody to type it because you're saying it very clearly.
Well, and I mean, the key here is, if you guys want to throw broaden it and start including projects, that can be done, but your trademark expenses are going to go through the roof as you try to clear stuff. I mean, I can guarantee that, let me just finish the thought. I mean, I can guarantee that Nova is owned by somebody out there, right? And that if we start using OpenStack Nova, we'll get a letter from somebody. So.
We specifically don't want to use projects with the trademark, regardless of the expense. We are specifically trying to not ever have it called OpenStack Nova. Also because the projects are likely to mature and end of life where the programs will not. And Keystone conversion to Keystone Light conversion back to Keystone is a great example of that. We got through 3 code bases.
No, it makes perfect sense now that I've sort of solved it, because I think it solves the TC's problem, which is they want a way to associate the OpenStack brand with projects. And I don't think it needs to be direct, and I think it gives us that ability of easier to maintain, because if we had to do this for every potential project that comes in, the management nightmare, that is just crazy. So,
it also gives the separation of concerns between the TC and the board that we've been trying to achieve, which is the board can say these programs are logically part of OpenStack, and the TC can then say, all right, well, we believe that these projects are the expression of those programs.
Yep.
It also means the TC can kick a project out if it's necessary, with the board
without any
being
board
required to say anything about the program.
Yeah, makes sense.
So does that necessarily mean then that the TC is now the project or the program lead and not the project lead?
Well, that's how it's written right now on the wiki, but I am somewhat uncomfortable with that. I think that's a TC governance question that we need to leave up to them.
Because you could have then multiple project leads within one single program and have different leads for each of those.
Well, that is the confusion right now about the fact that programs and projects have one-to-one correspondence. Glance actually has an OpenStack image program, or an OpenStack image service program right now, which seems inappropriate, but it was to resolve this issue of having a PTL position being one PTL per program.
We actually specified that, right, by not having locked elections, right? Were they per program? I thought they were completely open seats.
I think they're completely open seats, so you're right. I don't think there's an issue. Well, PTLs still have other roles and responsibilities, not only related to TC membership. TC, yeah. Okay. I think that's resolved.
So, I want to open it up to see if people are comfortable with taking this resolution to the board for action. Is there any dissent? I'll say it that way.
I think you may want to summarize again since we've gone through a couple iterations.
So I'll read what I typed. The DefCore will recommend to the board that we replace the core projects with program names in the bylaws, which is actually a responsibility we have. And we will have an initial list of programs that are on this list. We will further recommend several projects as recognized members of the appropriate programs. We will also need the foundation to validate that the program trademarks are clear.
Well, so wait a minute. The project names in the bylaws, I have to go back and double check, but I think that they're only the initial ones. So,
right.
Okay. So you want to delete those?
Actually, it's our job. It says in the bylaws specifically that list will be altered.
Yes.
We actually are required to alter it.
Okay.
And my suggestion is this is how we fulfill that duty, is by replacing it with the list of programs.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But, so Rob, I think that's the right thing to do. We probably ought to review just maybe with Terry or somebody on the TC to make sure that they don't have an issue before we take it to the board, but otherwise I think it's the right way to go.
Van, I think you should... Well, this is Van, I'm on the TC. I was going to say this is very relevant to our discussion even in today's TC meeting about our recent incubation request and the program project lines, and especially is our end goal collaboration or is our end goal competition? So definitely need some shopping around the TC, but if you could put it in a mailing list thread, I think it would be really perfect timing. Strike while the iron is hot.
For what it's worth, I tried to bring it up on the thread, but I think the backing of the committee will help attract the appropriate attention more. One thing to note is that it's hard for Josh and I to do discussions with the TC because all our requests have to be moderated.
We can't post anything to OpenStack-TC.
All our replies are moderated. All right. So, Rob and Josh, we'll take this as an action item and put together a summary.
So just to be clear, we're gonna take the names out of the bylaws. We're not gonna substitute new ones in, right? Or is that the intention?
We will put program names in the bylaws and take the project names out.
So the suggestion on the table is not resolved yet, is to take those actions.
No, I would recommend we take them out and leave it to the discretion of the board, which can then delegate it to the technical committee to decide what programs are part of core.
It's inappropriate for the TC to define the programs that should be part of core. That is the responsibility of the board. It is the TC's responsibility to designate which projects are part of those programs.
No, actually,
of concern.
no, actually, the way it works is that the board, you're right, the board determines what's core, but they can only do that based on recommendation from the technical committee. What I'm saying is we can delegate to the technical committee the naming of those programs, not determining what they are. But all I'm trying to do is I would prefer not to go from a situation where we have a bunch of names that projects that we don't like to a bunch of names of programs which we may or may not like. I would like to get programs and projects out of the bylaws because the bylaws are so difficult to amend.
Yeah, and I think what we probably want to do is think about a process by which to add new programs, because I agree that once you put them in the bylaws, having any new ones or amending them in the future, like the one change that telemetry just went recently under, that is going to be very, very hard the bigger OpenStack grows.
So I'm going to recommend, first, we're trying to wrap up the meeting in a 90-minute window. I'm going to recommend that this is a topic for discussion in the legal committee.
Okay.
Which is meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, I think this fits directly into the what changes are required of the bylaws. But I think the basic idea of board approving programs and the projects, I mean, that basic philosophy I think works. And now we got to figure out the right way to incorporate it in the.
Yeah, we just need to. All I want to do is I don't want to have more stuff named in the bylaws because that's just a way of making all our lives miserable. Okay.
I agree with you.
Here.
Okay, so for the agenda for the next meeting, I have 2 items right now to review the status of the Tempest coverage. Actually 3. We're going to have a readout from the criteria meeting. Actually, we're going to have to discuss the criteria, and then we're going to plan program versus project actions by the board. That's a full agenda.
And could we also add in there, and maybe this is just something that's done in the interim, is that we take a look at all the names that are proposed to be project names to make sure that they're truly generic and not,
We'll ask the foundation to go through that exercise before
right, correct.
we get further.
I think that's the right way to handle it. Yes. Okay.
So our next meeting is not going to be until early in the next year. We can send out an email to try and find the next time, but I suspect
doodle board. Yeah.
A doodle board first full week of January.
I'm in London. I can do it from there. But.
So that means we'll do a morning meeting first week of January. Probably a Tuesday. So tentatively Tuesday at 8 o'clock Pacific time on the 7th.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a date.
If you target noonish, you might be able to get early people in Asia and the.
I can do noon. That's 8 o'clock at night. That's fine.
Yeah, so that's a evening.
Okay. All the same to me. That sounds fine. So 1/7, 12 noon PST is our tentative time for Elephant 3.
90 minutes.
90 minutes. Everybody, thank you. We have a couple of resolutions. We'll put together a summary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
A tarball is the actual source code.
They make it with reference to a release.
Right. Okay. So a release on OpenStack.org of a particular tarball, then I guess.
Of a particular package with a particular version string.
Well, so the term package is dangerous. Okay. Well, that's fine. Whatever.
Okay, a particular set of software identified by a release identifier.
Right, so it is the package as bundled by OpenStack and not as bundled by a downstream distro such as Ubuntu or Red Hat or Fedora or etc.
Yes, mostly. If somebody downstream takes the OpenStack release and puts it in a different format, then it is still considered to be the same release, and maybe it's designed to be, however packaged, the set of functionality identifiable relative to a certain release.
So there's an implicit assumption in there that packaging does not change the release, which I would dispute, but let's leave that be for now. As long as this is a reference to the OpenStack produced package, I think that makes sense.
That's basically how it works because they need to work across releases, and so let's give one example which I think may be clarifying. Let's say that a Linux distributor took the OpenStack package and then they bundled in an additional set of functionality. They bundled in maybe there's a new virtualization driver that they bundle in. Then what would be covered under OIN would be the functionality associated with the release from OpenStack.org and would explicitly exclude the vendor added functionality, unless that was separate.
Gotcha. So from a RefStack and DefCore standpoint, what is the optimum way for us to interact with OIN?
So what they want is, and the reason why OIN is important is because it is defining a set of cross-licensed functionality, that if someone has a patent that reads on something in one of those packages, some functionality in one of those packages as of the identified version, then that is cross-licensed within that OIN community. Mm-hmm. So what we want, and we're also working on a broader set of patent defenses, both for within OpenStack and for externally facing. So we need to decide, hey, well, let's take, for example, let's say that there's going to be, we want to make sure that there's no difference between what is covered by the trademark and what is covered by the patent cross-license. Because if you open up space between those, then that is going to, then that leaves room for lots of monkey business. Imagine for a second that we have in the future a program, which is one of the things that we're working on, that says, hey, we're going to, anyone makes an assertion against an OpenStack implementation, we are going to allow and empower the foundation to fight back on that and to participate in a legal defense fund around that. In which case, people are going to say, well, what is included in that sort of program? For example, would Savannah be included, or would if someone did patent infringement and accused Savannah, would that be included or not? And the idea is that whatever we ultimately end up defining as core, i.e., whatever is defined as being covered by the OpenStack mark, is going to end up also being the same set of functionalities that we build patent protections around.
Okay, so
this actually is not as clear to me, because the purpose that we're defining with DefCore is the minimum set that's required if you want to claim the trademark. I think there's clearly things that are beyond that, and we want to be beyond it. Right, we had discussed previously the concept of commons, and I would expect things that are officially in commons would be included in this, in a trademark, potentially in a trademark.
The other potential challenge is that there is no logical association between OpenStack and Linux, in the sense that OpenStack can be run on a Windows machine using Hyper-V and hosting Windows VMs. So I don't object to including it in the Linux system definition, but I think we are stretching the Linux system definition, specifically when we're doing things like including the Hyper-V driver in it. So I would wonder if there are negative impacts on Linux as covered by the OIN.
Well, just one question here is from a DefCore point of view. So let's just remember that OIN did this on their own. I completely agree that they're taking the Linux definition and and extending it in a way which I don't think people anticipated, but that is what it is. I'm not sure, I think getting the coverage from OIN is very helpful. I'm not sure how big an issue it is for DefCore, because I think DefCore is focused on what do we think the trademark should be used on. So the fact that we have a patent cross-license and that patent cross-license covers things that may not be within the scope of the trademark, I don't think is critical. We can, because from our point of view, what we control and what I think is critical to DefCore is what is it that is necessary to be used for somebody to say that they have an OpenStack distro.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, Van, do you agree with that?
Generally, yes. I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't, in particular, since OIN is a third party who has demonstrated a certain independence, I think is the kind way of putting it. They didn't actually come to us prior to doing this. I would be loath to give them more power, right? So.
Yeah, I would suggest, and Nick has just put this in the Etherpad, which I think is a great suggestion, that if OIN is asking for our input at this point, we would suggest that they should include